On November 8, 2023, a Japanese energy company called Ineos Group wired nearly $4 million for a single right to pass through a canal. The water level at Gatun Lake had fallen to 79.6 feet, the lowest recorded since 1965, and the Panama Canal Authority was rationing crossings like a scarce commodity. That single canal ticket was worth roughly 1.5 times the propane the ship was actually carrying. The fiscal year that contained those worst drought months was also the most profitable year the canal had ever had. Revenue held almost flat, net income rose by about $300 million. The Panama Canal Authority's return on equity averaged around 21% over 5 years, roughly double what the S&P 500 delivered. The canal did not endure the drought, it monetized it. And the reason that should matter to anyone watching global trade, American exporters, or Asian energy buyers is that the water crisis is not really a water crisis. It is a structural one, and there are 4 things propping up the public story. Every one of them is cracked. The canal runs on fresh water. Each transit through the older Panamax locks dumps about 52 million US gallons of fresh water straight into the ocean. That's 200 million litres per ship. The whole system pulls about 2.5 times the amount of water a city of the size of New York uses. The reservoirs that feed it were built over a century ago, when Panama's population was under 1 million. It's now close to 4.5 million people. Canal traffic has grown with it. The reservoirs have not. So when the rainy season delivered in 2023, the system broke exactly where you'd expect. That year was the 3rd driest year ever recorded in Panama across more than a century of data. October alone came in about 41% below normal rainfall. Daily transits, which normally sit in the mid-30s, fell to 18 at the trough. The queue of waiting ships peaked at 163, and the draft restriction dropping the maximum depth by 6 feet cut a near Panamax container ship's usable capacity by about 40%. The canal wasn't failing because of a freak weather event. It was failing because it was designed for a smaller world. The second thing propping up the story is the expansion Panama already paid for. In 2006, Panamanians approved a $5.25 billion expansion. Only about 43% of eligible voters turned out. The pitch included new Panamax locks with water-saving basins advertised to recycle up to 60% of the water per transit. Problem solved in theory. In practice, those basins draw water from the bottom of the adjacent lock chamber, the densest, saltiest layer, and recycle it upward into Gatun Lake, which also supplies drinking water to roughly half of Panama's population. The more the basins are used, the saltier the drinking water gets. One engineering analysis put it plainly: this problem was identified in early engineering reports on the canal expansion, and it remains unclear to me why it wasn't addressed at the design stage. So the flagship water saving feature has to be used sparingly. The water savings the referendum was sold on were never fully delivered. The same 2006 law that authorized the expansion also explicitly forbade the Canal Authority from building new reservoirs outside its historical watershed. The one obvious fix was banned by the same legislation that caused the problem. Panama's Supreme Court didn't strike that restriction down until 2024, 18 years later. The Canal Authority has been publicly framing itself as a system fighting for survival. The filings tell a different story. The fiscal year that contained the worst drought months, which runs October through September, saw revenue basically flat at about $5 billion. Net income jumped by roughly $300 million up to $3.45 billion. The next fiscal year built another record on top. Revenue crossed $5.7 billion. The direct contribution to Panama's treasury came in close to $3 billion, roughly a quarter of all government revenue. So how does a toll road make more money when fewer ships are using it? 3 mechanisms: a toll restructure approved before the drought and phased through it, container tolls up 12.5% per loaded box, liquefied natural gas tariffs up 200% over 3 years, a freshwater surcharge that scales as the lake falls $10,000 fixed per transit plus up to 10% of the toll, and slot auctions. The Ineos $4 million transit was the headline, but it's not even the strangest part of that auction. That was a northbound return trip on an empty tanker. which only makes sense if the charter economics on the other leg were already pricing drought risk into the propane itself. The canal wasn't just extracting money from shippers, it was shaping the price of every commodity that crossed it. Container ships, which paid the most per transit, actually got faster during the drought. Container wait times fell over 2023 from around a quarter of a day down to about a tenth. Meanwhile, general cargo weights climbed past 9 days, dry bulk climbed past 8. The highest margin segment got preferential treatment, the lower margin ones got squeezed out. Liquefied natural gas transits collapsed by somewhere between 66 and 73%. By 2024, 94% of US liquefied natural gas headed to Asia was taking the Cape of Good Hope route instead. That adds roughly 20 extra days at sea. It has not come back. The canal moved to a 100% bookings model in December 2023 and never switched back. Hydroelectric generation at the Gatun plant has been suspended since October 2018 to stop sending water through turbines, 5 years before the current crisis started. None of these structural changes were emergency measures. They were permanent. The fourth thing propping up the public story is the political theatre draped over it. In late 2024, the incoming US president claimed Panama was overcharging American ships and that China operates the Panama Canal. Neither was accurate. The canal is run by the Panama Canal Authority, a constitutionally autonomous Panamanian body handed the waterway under the Torrijos-Carter treaties. Tolls under the accompanying neutrality treaty have to be just and reasonable and non-discriminatory. The US Navy pays an average of about $30,000 per warship transit, totaling a few $1,000,000 a year, not the fortune being implied. As for China, a Hong Kong-listed company called CK Hutchison operated 2 of the port terminals at the canal's ends. The concession had been signed in 1997 and renewed without competitive bidding in 2021. Those are landlord arrangements at the mouths of the canal. They do not control who transits it. But political pressure did what political pressure does. In March 2025, CK Hutchison announced a $22.8 billion deal to sell its global ports business to a BlackRock-led consortium, including MSC. Its stock jumped 22% that day, the biggest one-day move since 2015. A month later, the Panamanian comptroller released an audit alleging that somewhere between $300 million and $1.3 billion had been lost to contract irregularities over the decades, with the specific figure depending on scope and source. That audit landed the same day the US Defense Secretary arrived in Panama. It had been launched on January 20th, US Inauguration Day. In January 2026, Panama's Supreme Court annulled the port concession outright. The terminals are now being operated on an 18-month interim basis by Maersk, and MSC Hutchison is seeking at least $2 billion in arbitration. China has retaliated by detaining roughly 3/4 of Panama flagged vessels entering Chinese ports. A drought that started as a weather story became political cover for a complete reshuffle of who controls port infrastructure between 2 oceans. The bill for all of this lands on people who never signed up to pay it. To guarantee water for the next 50 years, the Canal Authority wants to build a new reservoir on the Rio Indio, a dam with a price tag near $1.6 billion. It would flood roughly 17 square miles of forest and farmland. Anywhere from 2,000 people directly to around 12,000 across the wider basin would be affected, depending on how you define affected. 90% of riverside families polled by a University of Panama sociologist oppose the dam. There's a less disruptive option on the table. A pipeline from a lake about 100 kilometers east, already dammed, already generating hydropower, was endorsed by the head of Panama's National Water Council as a longer horizon fix that wouldn't flood a single village. It was reportedly discarded, partly because tapping it would require negotiating with a joint venture that includes a US-listed power company. The compensation envelope inside the Rio Indio budget works out to roughly $200,000 per directly displaced person, or closer to $30,000 if you use the wider basin figure. The cheaper option, from the canal's perspective, is the one that floods villages. Meanwhile, American grain exporters absorb around $10 a ton on Asia-bound soybeans, and up to $30,000 a day in extra fuel when ships reroute around Africa. Asian buyers of US gas pay for about 20 extra days of voyage. US container importers pick up shipping line surcharges somewhere between $40 a box and nearly $300. For anyone watching from outside Panama, a few concrete things follow. If you hold global shipping stocks, the pricing power story here is structural, not cyclical. Tankers that left for the Cape in 2023 have mostly not returned, and the canal is now pursuing a 76-kilometer land bridge pipeline to cannibalize gas traffic altogether without using any more water. If you buy imported goods into North America's East Coast, carrier surcharges are now a fixed feature of the cost base, not a temporary blip. If you model energy markets, the winter spread between US and Asian gas has 10 to 20 extra days of tanker economics baked into it indefinitely. And if you follow US-China infrastructure tension, the Panama sequence, audit, sale, court ruling, retaliation is a template for how the next round of port-level disputes is likely to play out. One last thing worth holding on to. The 2023 drought was, per the attribution science, primarily an El Niño event, not a climate change event. Climate change will raise the risk of future ones, but it did not cause this one. The crisis was real, but it was a structural failure amplified by weather, not weather breaking a healthy system. Forecasters are watching a potential El Niño for 2026 and 2027. The Rio India reservoir won't start filling until 2032 at the earliest. The solution will arrive at best, one drought too late. This is general information only, not personal financial advice. Please consider speaking with a licensed financial advisor in your jurisdiction before making any decisions.